and welcome to the Red Mountain Community Church podcast, where you can hear conversations with the people of Red Mountain Community Church as we pursue Jesus together. Each episode highlights what God is doing in someone's life or a specific theme in light of what God has revealed in the Bible. I'm Peter Franson, one of the elders and your fellow seat warmer here at Red Mountain Community Church. My co-host today is Della Zwick, our Director of Family Ministry. Della, thanks for being here and doing this again.
Glad to be here.
All right, we're going to kick things off with the irresistible question, and that is, what would be your favorite decade and why? Now, when I gave you some heads up on this one, because I felt like I needed some time to think about it too, because that is so broad. What would be your favorite decade and why? Like, well, for me personally, or like, are we talking fashion trends or music, or like, what do we mean by favorite decade? So I just said, I think in an email, you can interpret that, categorize that however you want, and then respond what your favorite is and why. So what would you say?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that you gave me some time to think about it, because initially when you had texted that to me, I thought, well, this will be a fun and easy question.
Yeah. But
I found that it really did have a lot of aspects to it. And the way that I use that is God really seemed to direct me to just looking back over the decades of my life. And I just found just like such a thread of his faithfulness to me and just reviewing all the different things, the good, the bad, all those type of things. But where I really landed is I feel very blessed for where I am right now in my life. And so I'd have to say, this is my favorite decade for a few reasons. There's a verse that is in 2 Corinthians 6:2 that says, "Now is a favorable time. Behold, now is a day of salvation." So the first thing I thought of is, I love being part of this church. I love the staff that I get to work with. I love the people here at this church. And I just agree. I hear so many people saying this, and it's so true. This is the most important work we'll ever do. This is a safe place. God is bringing new families to our church every week who need to hear about Jesus, or maybe know Jesus but need a community. We're building this beautiful children's building. Apparently, God has plans to bring even more families to us. Yeah. So that is what I'm really excited about. But I would say on a personal level, the greatest joy in my life right now is that I'm now a grandma. Oh. And I have a 19-month-old grandson, Matthew, and a 5-month-old son, Caden.
Wow.
And over this past year, God has brought both of my sons back to Arizona. I was getting on a plane and going to visit my grandson. My youngest was born here.
Okay.
But they also come to this church. And
oh, wow.
People have always said, oh, it's so wonderful to be a grandma. It has gone far beyond that. I mean, it is like such a joyful time for me. The fact that I get to see them on a weekly basis. I was just over there last weekend, and Matthew has been trying really hard to say his name, and I knew what he was saying, but this weekend, for the first time, he just proudly told me that his name is Matthew, and it was just like the cutest thing, and I was there for that.
Nice.
And then Caden, he just loves his big brother so much, and somehow he made him laugh and smile, and there was just such joy, and I just thought, I'm so glad that I'm here for this. And then I'm looking down the pike here and thinking, if I continue to live on this earth, I want to be able to see them grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus, to be part of their lives, to share my faith with them, but not just with them, with the generation that's here at this church, whether I'm on staff or in a few years when I retire, that's what it's all about for me. So I'm just super excited because where God works is in the present. The past is really important. It's really instructive to us, and we can look back at it with fondness and sometimes think, oh, I'm glad that I'm not going through that right now. Yeah. But the present is where we really need to camp.
Yeah.
And even Jesus has said, don't worry about tomorrow because today has enough trouble of its own. Yeah. So we all have things that are going on at all times, but it's just great to be among a group of people where we're following Jesus and just trying to join him where he's at.
Yeah.
So it's now. for me.
And that's such a wise scriptural perspective. We see a great presentness in Scripture as God says things like, now today if you hear His voice, then do not harden your hearts.
Yeah, exactly.
Now is the time, and so I appreciate that. And I think I would just like to steal your answer because I went really shallow and dorky with mine, and specifically chose.
It's a good balance because I could have gone that way too. I was thinking about it,
but I thought, okay, I'll go pop culture. Let's zero it in a little bit more. I will go comic books, and I'm a big DC comic book fan. And in the aughts, so like the 2000, through 2019, I guess. 2011. That's right. 2000 to 2009, right? That's the aughts. And then we get into the teens is when you get 10, 11. Okay, so yeah, it would have been like 2000 to 2009 was like a golden age for me personally in DC Comics because they had some writers that were drawing on the rich history of DC Comics and revitalizing it in some really cool ways and taking like characters and telling stories about them that are really character driven. So you're like really invested in them. I really like character driven stories. And when it's not, I don't want just the flipping in spandex and shooting laser guns. I want to care about the characters. You want a storyline,
and you're like developing the characters, as you said.
Yeah, characters that I can feel along with, and so that period in DC, they took a dip after that for about the next decade, and they're getting back on track in some ways now. But that 2000 to 2009 in DC Comics. That's
that was the time.
That was the time. That was Pater's golden age of reading comic books. I think I had some letters printed in comics during that time when they were still printing letters. Yeah. Anyway, so as a reminder, you can message us on Instagram or Facebook with suggestions for fun things that we could do or talk about before the interview. But for now, we are going to move on. Earlier today, Della and I spent some time talking with Doreena. Did you pronounce her name Wiegert? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Just about her life and some really significant loss and how the Lord worked in the aftermath of that to do just some really stunning, amazing, wonderful things in her life and in the lives of other people, work that He is continuing through her to this day. It's really a standout conversation to me. I hope you guys enjoy it. Well, Doreena, thanks so much for getting behind the microphone. I know it's, have you ever done anything like this before?
Never.
Yeah, most people haven't.
Well, I take that back. In my job, I sat for news interviews.
Oh, okay.
But they were never this extensive.
Okay.
And it always ends up, that just 8-second soundbite,
Oh, yeah.
on the news. So it was never a discussion.
Yeah. So this is less high profile, but more extensive.
Yes.
We're going deeper in. This will be great. I've been looking forward to this. So if you could start, Doreena, by giving me just a snapshot of like your current stage of life and just any people or routines that are relevant to describing that.
Current snapshot. Well, we're in retirement. So I retired in 2015.
Okay.
And my husband retired in 2019. So, since 2019, we've just been rediscovering different passions and interests and, putting our energy into things here at church, of course. Lately, we're very busy with our dogs. We, when retiring, we took on the interest of raising bird dogs.
Bird dog, like that hunt birds?
Hunting, yeah, they hunt birds. That's must be interesting. It is, and it's super fun, and it has really opened our social world, a lot of different people that have the same interest. And so, we have bird dogs, and Jerry is more involved with the training aspect of the hunting part.
Okay.
I was involved with the training aspect of the, be good dogs around the house type of, of a thing.
Yeah. Oh man.
But it's super fun, and the people that we have met are just super fun, and it's taking us different places around the country and meeting different people, and just a lot of fun there.
How long does it take from birth to like sale for them to be ready as a product, as it were, for the hunting?
So for hunting,
there is a lot of work that goes into. So we didn't acquire the dogs until after that 8-week weaning period.
Yeah.
So but on day one when we get them, the paws on the ground, we're training for that end.
Wow.
And it's a little different than just training a puppy to have be a good puppy around the house.
I would
There's
think.
different different skills that you're training the dog for, and from the moment you get them, you're training them to search out a bird or a scent. You're training them to fetch. You're training them to bring the something back to you, and there's a lot that goes into it. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun and challenging.
Wow. Yeah. I could have you on just to talk about that. I'm so curious.
Jerry would be the one to talk to you about that. Okay. He would be the one.
Wow. Okay. So, when and how roughly did you first come to faith in Jesus?
Well, I would say full faith in Jesus, where I fully understood my need for a Savior and my need for redemption, came in my teenage years. But we grew up believing in God. I knew that there was this being named God, and that there was a Jesus. I guess I just didn't have just the head knowledge of who he was.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for praying grandparents, because they really, really did cover myself and my siblings, in prayer just throughout our life. But when I was 14 years old, my sister and I, she was 12 at the time, were sent to a Christian summer camp by my grandparents.
Okay.
And it was in California, Hume Lake, California.
Okay.
Super fun. That was a week-long camp at that time. And it was there that I truly understood. And, God met me there. And, just, he just showed me that, Jesus is a person who is fully God and fully man, and came to this world to save all of man from our sins. And, I learned that, sin was something I couldn't save myself from. I couldn't just be a good person and get to heaven to be with Jesus. I truly had to accept his sacrifice on my behalf. And that it was at that camp that it just became very real. And my sister too. So we both accepted Christ at the summer camp. And later on, was able to share, with my brother and sister. And we're a family of 4 siblings that are going to see each other again in heaven one day.
Oh, wow.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, so I understand you're a retired police officer specifically, which so like I told you in the lobby, I didn't know whose face I was going to see when I do these interviews. I'm probably going to recognize this person's face. Your face was not among those that I pictured. I think it's just because I'm so narrow in my mind. I was like, okay, so retired female police officer, she's going to have some grizzle to her, it's going to be kind of like have some toughness to her. And you are all the vibes I get from you are like sweet and gentle. And I'm just, I'm still trying to picture being pulled over by you.
It's pretty funny. When you say sweet and gentle, I don't know that I would use those words to describe myself, just because, there was the work me, there was the home me, there's a lot of hats that you wear in law enforcement. And when you're on the job, you're there to take care of business.
Yeah.
And that's what I was doing. I was taking care of business. So I spent 27 years in law enforcement.
Wow. So what made you want to go into that field?
It wasn't something that, I wanted to do all my life. I did, when I went to college, I did study criminal justice, studies, and that was my major.
Okay.
I had no idea really what I wanted to do with that until actually I graduated.
It was just a topic that fascinated you, or
it was because I knew it was broad. It was broad enough to, there's, the courts aspect. There's the law enforcement, of course, and then there's the incarceration, side of it as well. So there's multifaceted.
Yeah.
There's research. There's so many aspects directions that I could have gone with it. But I just hadn't really honed in, on one thing. I did two, ironically, you'll see later. I did 2 internships at a couple of different prisons.
Oh.
But the reason I'm really glad I did those particular internships is it's because it showed me that I didn't want to work in the prison system. It just didn't feel like a good fit, and it felt dead end. Very, very dead end.
Okay.
So I just said, well, I'm young. I don't have to make this decision right away. I had a job. My get me through college job was working at Peter Piper Pizza.
Hey,
so
awesome.
Peter Piper Pizza.
That's right.
So, and when I graduated, they moved me into a management position. The restaurant that I worked at, on Friday and Saturday evenings, we had a police officer just, hanging out in the parking lot and, just make sure that, peace was kept and so forth. And,
those Peter Piper folks can get really rowdy.
Pretty rowdy. those fights over those pinball games,
That's right, yeah.
So one evening, I remember having this conversation, and it's one that helped me to make a very important decision and a very good decision. I really, really enjoyed working for the police department.
Wow.
And it was the Phoenix Police Department. I'll clarify that.
Okay.
So the officer that worked, it was a woman officer, a female officer, and she learned a little bit about my background in school, and she said, "What are you doing? What are you doing here? Go apply. We're hiring. We need we need women officers on the street." And I thought, I'd done a few ride-alongs, when I was in school. So, and I thought it was interesting, but I in talking with her more, I just had a connection with her. And so, beginning of May 1988, I put in my application, and the day after, Memorial Day, day after Memorial Day, I was in the academy. So that month was a whirlwind of testing and interviews and you name it. I was looked at by every microscope that you can think of during that month, and it was an eye opener.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's
quite a process.
It's so fascinating to me, the people that go into careers like law enforcement or firefighting or the military, because I am such a coward, and so I'm just like thinking, how do you willingly say I'm going to enter a career where I am willingly putting myself in danger? I mean, it's just like, have you always kind of been like a bold, risky? Were you a risky kid? You liked adventures, or like?
I would say. Yeah, but not, always involved in sports growing up.
Okay.
And, I was athletic and, excuse me. And just so that competitive drive in me.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, that's all right.
That the competitive drive in me, was always there.
And it also sounds like God really opened doors for you, that it just seemed like he put people in different positions and you're like, okay, well, I'll go ahead and do this. And it all just kind of worked for you just every step of the way.
It did. Everything just fell right into place.
Wow. Now, a very significant part of your story that you knew we were going to talk about is the death of your first husband, Brent. What did your stage of life look like at the time of his passing, and what caused his death?
Okay, stage of life. Well, Brent and I were married a little over 6 years, and we had at that time a 4-year-old son. He was just about 4.
Okay.
So I was still working, of course. And at this particular time, I was no longer in patrol. I had moved on from working the streets. I'd worked the streets for 7 years.
Okay.
And moved on to a police activities league position where officers are placed in rec centers in strategic neighborhoods within the city that had experienced maybe a little bit higher crime for children.
Yeah.
So I'd worked there for a couple of years, and then I moved into the schools. I was a school resource officer for a couple of years as well.
Is that like the ones that like will kind of walk around campus and they're just kind of there to monitor behavior and stuff like that?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. So it was during that position, when I was working that position, where I did lose Brent.
Okay.
He worked at the prison that is just west of town named Perryville.
What's it called?
Perryville.
Perryville. Okay.
Yeah, you can no longer see it from I-10 as you're heading
to California,
towards California.
But it's the one that like they have signs there for like don't pick up hitchhikers. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I know the one you're talking about. Okay, so way out there.
How much detail do you want? Because it is a story.
As much as you think is relevant.
Okay.
It's up to you entirely.
There's definitely quite a bit that's relevant. So one day let's just go right back to the day.
Yeah.
One day I had been to the grocery store. I was going to make us a really nice dinner, and it was a Friday. And this was March 7th, and it was 1997.
Okay.
And I get a phone call, and it's telling me the person, it was the chaplain for the prison, told me that Brent had been injured at work and he had been airlifted from the facility to St. Joseph's Hospital, and that I probably should go. And I pressed, for more information. I wanted to know, how badly he was injured, and I wanted to know what his injury was. And he told me that he had been stabbed and he had lost a significant amount of blood, and it was grave. He told me it was grave. So I grabbed Blake. I didn't even finish putting the groceries away. I grabbed Blake and ran next door to my next door neighbor and told her what had happened. And she called her sister, who lived down the street, and who came and watched all of the kids. And Charlene drove me to the hospital. Prayed all the way. I knew it was serious. I was scared out of my mind. Just super afraid of what had happened. And I arrived to the hospital, and the people there ushered me off to a room about this size. It's off of the main waiting room for the emergency room. And Brent's brother was already there. And he hadn't been told anything. He told him, he'd been injured, but he didn't ask.
Okay.
I had to know.
Yeah.
So Troy just didn't ask. And he asked me, what's going on? I told him that he had been stabbed, and then he flipped out. And it seemed like just seconds later, in walked a group of people. It wasn't doctors. Was the assistant director for the Department of Corrections, and spoke the most chilling words I think I'd ever heard and have heard since. He said, "Mrs. Lumley, I regret to inform you that your husband is deceased." And it was a moment that stood still. Time just seemed to freeze, and because I never expected to hear that.
Yeah.
I knew he was hurt. I just didn't expect to hear that he had been killed.
I cannot imagine how you must have been feeling in that moment. Just shock and disbelief, because it's serious, but you just never are prepared for something like that. It's like your whole world just stops.
It did. I in those moments, all I remember doing was sobbing and crying and screaming and trying to console Troy, because he was just angry, and that was he was lashing out. How did this happen? How did this happen? So that, and it just I remember telling the doctors that I wasn't going to leave until Brent's body left. I knew that they were going to be taking him to the medical examiner's office due to the nature of his injuries. He was stabbed by inmates. If I didn't share that, this was something that happened about 2:00 in the afternoon, and it was at shift change from first shift to second shift. He was a first shift officer.
Okay.
And as second shift was coming on, the inmate that gained access to him took his life and got back into his own cell. It ended up being a plan that had been concocted through the day.
Okay.
Due to some activity that had happened. Brent had searched this inmate's cell and found items of contraband and confiscated them and locked them down and written them up. And and this inmate was mad. He was mad for being caught committing crime.
Yeah.
So he, along with, there were 7 inmates total that were involved in this plan. To varying degrees, of distracting other officers, on the yard, to finding the weapon, getting the weapon to the inmate that committed the assault, to letting, just manipulating the locks, in such a fashion to, let the locked down inmate out of his locked cell to get to where Brent was. So that's how his injury occurred.
Okay.
There's much more to that story that maybe they'll come up in questions, but yeah, a very tumultuous time in my life, changed my life. The course of, my course direction just totally changed that day. You don't ever expect to suddenly become a single mom in that way.
Yeah.
In any way, I don't think anybody really expects that. For the first couple of years, I will say that I was angry and bitter, not really wanting to run to God. I had so many questions about how a good God could allow something so vile to happen to such a good guy. Brent was good. He was a great husband. He was a good father. He was good at his job. He was honest. He just was a good person. And it was something that it rocked my world. And this, and not only mine, his family and my whole family, his friends. He was a very well-liked person.
Yeah.
He did anything for anybody. It was just senseless, just a very senseless, a very senseless act.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, my anger was very was very evident.
So what then did just you're sitting here and talking about it, and as you're reflecting, I still see, there's so many complex emotions, I'm sure, in this, but among the things I see on your face is a little bit of a smile as you reflect on this. And you don't seem angry and enraged. And so you've been on some kind of a journey, and that's what I'm so curious about. What did healing and recovery from that look like in terms of like where you began? So you started in that place of really intense anger, and then the journey to where your thoughts and your feelings about it are where they're at today. And along with that, I'd love for you to comment on how you think maybe God was and has been caring for you, shaping you throughout that journey.
Okay. But it's a loaded question.
It is. There's a lot there. That's a lot there.
if I forget something, kind of guide me.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So, okay. Moving from anger and bitterness into peace was it there, like you said, it was a journey, and it took a careful orchestration of events on God's part. I recognize now, because I certainly couldn't have reached there on my own. I was trying, but failing miserably.
What did it look like to try?
It looked like me trying to hold everything together on the outside, but just really super broken on the inside, not doing anything right. And it manifests itself by me alienating people in my life that loved me. I was mad, and that it came out as, anger and impatience and just bitter. I guess that's how I would say. And you can ask anybody in my family, and they would say, "Oh yeah, she was a bitter woman back then." But that's it. Again, but for God, I would still be there. So I can't talk about this without talking about the adjudication process.
Okay.
With that, with all of these individuals, these 7 defendants. Yeah. Because there were a lot of court proceedings, as you can imagine, 7 people, and then magnify that by hearings.
Oh, good grief.
On all of the minutia, right?
Were you required to be there for those?
No, but I was. Everyone that I could attend, and that where I knew one of the defendants was going to be there, I planted myself in that court because Brent couldn't be there. I knew that I was his representative, and I took that responsibility. It was important to me. Probably to a fault, maybe I shouldn't have, but I just felt the responsibility to be there. So with that, is the, just the drudging up of, the events of the day over and over and over again. I just didn't let myself escape it.
Yeah.
And so
but you also didn't have control over all of that either, because you would just be notified that things were going to happen, and so things would get dredged up at times that you couldn't control at all.
Correct. And there were 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And I remember, I would say, the most significant day in my journey from bitterness and anger to breathing and peace and, okay, God, let's work this out, was one of the defendants had been sentenced already, and it was a pretty significant sentence, and that sentence was overturned on appeal and taken back to court. And I lost it. I was at my end, with that. We hadn't even dealt with the most critical defendant, the one who actually assaulted Brent yet. But this particular inmate was integral in letting this, the main defendant out of his cell. And, he had a big role. Yeah. So he was resentenced to, and it was a lesser sentence. However, the day I found out that the sentence was overturned was the day that I cried out to God. I just can't do this anymore without you. I've been trying. I can't. I cannot go on anymore trying to hold everything together without you in my corner. And I'm sorry, but this evokes so much emotion because it was such a pivotal moment and it's gratitude, and what my tears are gratitude. Because I thought in my heart that I had lost sight of God's sovereignty. But I realized that I really hadn't. I just hadn't accepted God's sovereignty, And I think many people have been to that point of asking God why. We're not saying, God, you're full of it. You have no control. But I didn't understand what, the reason for his death. And I understood that I never was denying God's sovereignty. I just didn't accept, I didn't accept that his plan had a purpose. I didn't, and I wasn't trusting it. So, in my crying out, I was asking God, just what do I need to do? How do I begin to just feel better about all of this? How do I function?
Yeah.
And you got to be careful what you ask God, for sometimes, because he asks you to do some really hard things that you're not ready to do. And the thing that he was asking me to do was forgive. And that was something that was, I knew in my heart of hearts, I knew eventually I would have to come to that place. I don't think, near ready, to approach the topic of forgiving the men who killed Brent. There was a lot of levels of forgiveness. I had to forgive Brent, for allowing himself to be that vulnerable, to an attack. And, there were a lot of layers for this forgiveness thing. But to start the journey of forgiving is where peace began.
Can you tell me what either it meant in your mind at that time or what it's come to mean now to forgive? I think this has come up sometimes when Kyle has preached on this topic, that I don't take from what you're saying so far that you're about to tell me that forgiveness means you've decided that what they did was not wrong. So what does that mean then for you to forgive in this kind of situation?
It meant freedom from me feeling like I had to be the judge of all of these people. And, what they did was wrong.
Yeah.
And they deserved, sure, to be punished for what they did, because what they did was a crime. And we have laws in this country, for things like that. And so I fully understood that justice through the court system was just. But their eternal judgment was not mine to give. It was God alone. And I needed to release that to him. And that's where the freedom was. And that's where my relationship with him healed. And it was, and I'm not here to say that it was a overnight process. It was a process, but it began with seeking out just counsel from pastors and Christian friends, and just bringing people alongside me to pray, about this. And, God was just so faithful. He was so faithful to me during that time that, everything in my life at that point started to fall in line with where he wanted me to be. I became a better mother, to Blake, and that's our son, Blake. I began to be able to look outwards instead of just, being selfish with my thoughts and so forth.
I just think just such a beautiful description of the process of forgiveness, because it's not something that we can just feel. We don't wait until we feel it. It's just an act of trust and saying, God, this is too big for me.
Right.
I cannot judge this, because what could ever really solve this? But I know that you're the perfect judge. And we have to keep making that choice over and over again, because there are some days, I'm sure, where you're like, okay, I'm not feeling like I want to forgive, but then you do that. And I love that you sought out community too, and people to surround you, because that is not something that we can easily do on our own. We need fellow believers around us to encourage us.
That is 100% correct. And back in the early days of my grieving process, I received a letter from a dear aunt of mine who adored Brent. And she was pouring out her heart to me, and she was the first person who told me that someday you're going to need to forgive these men, reminding me how forgiven I have been. And it was very brave of her, knowing how fragile I was at that time, to speak truth to me. She spoke truth to me. And at that time, I didn't want to hear it.
Sure.
I folded the letter and tucked it away. It is a treasure now. Excuse me. But yeah, the forgiveness was huge. It was a huge part of the healing journey. And every chance that I have to talk about it, I will. Because even in situations that have come up in my family, it's just, we've got to find a way to forgive, because it creates such a chasm, not only between, people that are important to you, but between you and the Lord, and not by his doing, by our doing. And it's totally, it's something total that is within our control to manage. And, as we're partnering with the Lord in that, but we have to agree to it. So,
did you find in that process of letting people into your experience, what you were feeling, and just the process of dealing with it, as it were, did you find anyone else that spoke from a place of similar experience? I mean, I'm just trying to imagine, I would think that so many people that I would always have the trump card of you don't know what it's like, and that everyone's words would just ring hollow to me unless I could be sure they knew what it's like. And I think I would, knowing my heart, I would probably use that very unfairly, but I'm just wondering, how that may be played in. Was there anyone that had similar experience, or were you being supported by people who had other things to offer you other than a similar experience?
So, yes, to answer the question simply with explanation. So there is this entity out there. They are supportive of first responder families, that have lost loved ones in the line of duty. So I did have a group of people that came around me from that aspect of my life. That law enforcement side.
So not necessarily believers, but people that had had a similar experience. Gotcha.
Correct. So the sharing of experience, through like incidences, I should say.
Yeah.
It was there, and I did find community and spiritual, connection with others, other believers in that community as well. But I didn't, we weren't, maybe attending the same church or whatnot. And actually none of those individuals attended the same church that I did.
Yeah.
I would say the community that was my strongest support were my neighbors.
Really?
At that time. Oh, my family, of course, but my neighbors were right there. I mean, they were, 2 steps away from me. I'd knock on a door if I needed something or to check on me. They were right there. My neighborhood became this amazing support system, and not just for me. We all developed this beautiful relationship where we began to support one another in things because there were hardships all over my neighborhood, and it just was a really beautiful thing, and that was God orchestrated for certain. And there were a lot of beautiful Christian women in that on my street that pointed me to Jesus and helped me to find a church that I hadn't been plugged into. And Blake and I began going to a great church. This was in the West Valley, by the way. And it was, my church history it's kind of a blah 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 all over the place. But I became solid, during this time for the Lord, and I know that's he used this time to draw me to Himself, and I'm just very thankful for that. Very thankful.
Another component is some really significant good that came about in the prison that Brent worked at, and as I understand, beyond even that prison. So what can you tell me about that?
So, Brent was attacked in a secured control room. It was the end of his shift, and he was in this area of, the complex where he was finishing up some paperwork, and there was a locked door between he and the assailant. And there were a lot of things that were wrong in the functionality of this control room, the cell doors, the fact that the yard within the complex was dirt. Why would dirt be a problem? Things can get buried in dirt.
Yeah, okay.
Like sharp objects, communication devices.
Okay, yep.
Drugs, other things, other items of contraband. And those things, how do you get stuff like that into prison? Well, there are work details that leave the prison and come back. And, people on the outside know this, and they leave things along the way. And, it's quite amazing, the things that end up, in prison. And Brent came home with lots of stories. But the knife that was used to stab him was one that was buried in the dirt on the yard. So a lot of things were wrong, procedurally, as well as construction and mechanically. They were wrong. And this was, brought to my attention by a lot of people that Brent worked with, and command position as well as, the line level positions.
After his passing.
After his passing. And they were urging me to, you've got to do something about this. And, I was like, now's the time. Now's the time to, get these things fixed. Well, I was approached by the Department of Corrections. They wanted my permission to rename the facility after Brent, where the facility where he died. And I said, no, there's too many things wrong with it. There's no way I feel good about putting a good name on something that is broken, that needs fixed desperately, not only for the safety of the officers, but for the safety of the inmates too. There's inmate on inmate crime that happens. Yeah. And, it would equally be safe for them. And prisons in the state are cookie cutters, and there's one after another prison that are, built exactly the same and have the exact same problems. So I advocated for these changes, and they did. It took about 3, almost 4 years for them to fix what was wrong, but they did. And Brent's name is now on that facility.
That's so meaningful. Wow. I'm so glad that you said no and that you were concerned about all those things that they needed to be fixed.
Yeah. So I feel good about standing my ground on that one.
Wow.
Standing Brent's ground on that one.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so let's fast forward then to just kind of today and where you're at, and talk about just you being at Red Mountain. You're involved in several ministries here, like as I understand, GriefShare. I know I've seen you in the TLC team and the new safety and security team that just formed, which is really neat to see that happening. So, what can you tell me about what it looks like, what you're doing in each of those roles?
Okay. So let me tell you about how I arrived at GriefShare, because it's quite a
it's a special story.
It truly
it's a God story.
It is.
Oh, great.
It is such a God story. So, so Jerry and I began attending here in 2020. It was actually the first Sunday after he retired. We landed here. I had visited this church many years ago. I think you were still meeting in the gym building. That's when that's at that time. That was my first visit with Blake. And
wait, did you say 2020?
2020.
So that's like in the middle of like COVID or whatever. Or pretty close.
It was just prior.
Okay, just
January.
Prior. Okay.
Things hadn't shut down yet.
Gotcha.
So we were here for 3 months and then couldn't be here for a little while. We were very grateful for the online option. That began. But so after the church opened back up and people were coming back in person, and we were sitting in our seats, and in walks a woman and sits down beside me, and she was alone, and Jerry was on the other side of me. And this woman sat down, and I introduced myself. We were new, probably just as new as this person, or maybe she had been there, and I just didn't know her. So I introduced myself, and she introduced herself, and she had lost her husband 2 weeks prior to that. And this was her first time coming to church since his passing. And I could tell that she was just very, very emotional. So, I didn't at all go into, my story. This was her time. I needed, to just let her know that I would pray for her, and just if she needed anything, she could, reach out. However, I lost track of her. We didn't exchange numbers, and she may still be attending, and she may still be out there somewhere, and I hope she is. But that's I think the first part of God moving here in this story onto GriefShare. Fast forward a few months, there was a business meeting at church that we came to, and I sat down with next to somebody. It was a woman next to somebody who was sitting alone. And I introduced myself, and she introduced herself. Can I name a name? Is that
Yes.
fair to do?
Sure.
This was Angela. Help me with last name, please.
Duty.
Angela Duty. I'm
Okay.
sorry, Angela. I love you, Angela. It was Angela Duty who had just, I think, a month prior lost her husband. And that was, I think she said, a heart attack. And so she shared with me, that a little bit about her story. And, I just was taking it in and just thinking, wow, another woman who's lost her husband and, still, very naive to, God's intertwining here of what he's doing. Then it may have been the very next sermon series that happened, and Kyle was preaching on the promptings of the Holy Spirit. It was a very powerful series for me. The message that I received during his preaching was that if you are being nudged by the Holy Spirit, or if you're feeling nudgings in any way, talk to somebody, get confirmation, ask for confirmation. Was this the Holy Spirit?
That's so wise. So wise.
It was the perfect message. It was it was exactly what God needed me to hear, because I remember exiting the sanctuary, and the first person I saw was Bob Fox. And I made an appointment with him.
Okay.
And we had a sit down, and I asked him, what do you think about this? I shared my story with him, and I shared the fact that, I've in the last last few months that I had these impromptu meetings with widows, and now I feel like I'm supposed to do something. I feel very strongly I'm supposed to be doing something. And I didn't know what that was. He, pointed me in the direction of Della, that of all of the family ministries, here, and her role, one of your roles. You wear many hats, and you were a very busy woman here. But he pointed me to Della and the ministry of GriefShare. And then
Can I just say something about our first meeting? When I first met Doreena, it's like Bob had thought, I think that, she would work really well in GriefShare. It's like I had no doubt. I could see God moving in you so clearly in your heart. You had said you wanted to work with women who are hurting. And I had asked you, would you be willing to come in and just visit GriefShare? And we were at the end of a GriefShare series, and that isn't the best time to bring someone into GriefShare because people have already been around one another for quite some time.
Yeah.
And I know it could be awkward, but I was confident that God had brought Doreena to us. So you agreed very bravely to come in. And from the time that she entered that room, people warmed to her. You just know how to listen to people, to affirm where they're at, come alongside them. And it was just such a natural. People are like, well, is Doreena coming back? And so I asked you, and you said, well, yeah, I'll come back next semester. And she has been such a blessing in our group. I have to tell you, she can also be firm if she feels like God is wanting somebody to really look at something in their grieving process. But people always feel cared for because you are very warm. And the one verse that I really think of for you, and I know it's special to you too.
It really is.
You know which one it is.
I absolutely do.
It's from 2 Corinthians 1:4, that, God comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort that we ourselves have received from God. And that is what I see very clearly in your life. You've gone through profound things, and people connect with that. Their losses are different, but they're like, you know what that's like. And you don't sugarcoat your journey at all. You talk about how it's really just took you to the brink of just like, I don't know how I'm going to go on.
Yeah.
I'm so angry. I don't want to look at this.
Yes. And this truly has been a blessing for me as well. I mean, when you discover a purpose, when you discover that God has a purpose in all of this, there's, I can't even describe the giddiness, the gratitude, the confirmation, of God's goodness, just through His leadings and direction. We have to think, my whole grieving process was well over 10 years, and 10 years of, not knowing what God had in store or why this had to happen. Why, even though I came to an understanding with God that, okay, we're going to partner in this, and I'm going to allow you to lead me through this. I'm just going to, dive in with you. The confirmation that something good was going to happen, and come out of this, and somehow He was going to use me as a vessel it's just indescribable. A blessing beyond blessing. And that verse that Della just wrote, I have it so here that I look for it in other people. I look for grief turning in a person to them being able to provide comfort for others, because that's the work that God did in me. And I understand the context of this verse, and where Paul was at when he was speaking, to other new believers and their trials and tribulations they were experiencing. But it's so applicable to anybody who is hurting, to just trust that God has a plan to use our hurt, because nothing is returned to Him void. We know that. I've heard you say that numerous times, and I believe it full on. That I look for that part of healing, through our GriefShare sessions, that where people get to the point where they can now comfort others, and it happens, right? We see it develops within
in the group
that 13.
itself. People just start practicing that. It's just a very natural thing.
It
and
is.
GriefShare always says that's one of the 6 signs of healing is sharing comfort with other people. It's part of God's plan, and it's very powerful.
It just really brings me a lot of joy to see that happening for other people, knowing it's peace and comfort in the midst of some hard sorrow.
So what's your, just kind of like the content of your involvement in GriefShare? I don't know what these meetings look like or what you're doing. So what are you doing in a GriefShare meeting?
I'm a co-facilitator.
Okay.
So there's 5 of us. And
is there like a curriculum or something? You guys are
There
like
is
a video
curriculum.
or something? Or?
Yeah. And it's used actually, I think, even outside the United States too. And it's been around for quite some time. It's very Christ focused and it's very good. Each week we have a different topic. And we engage with that. We break into smaller groups. That's why we have so many facilitators.
Okay.
We want really small groups so people can process things. But Doreena is very good at really helping in those situations and just coming alongside others.
I thank you for that. I thank you. But that's so our role is to guide people, through their grief, and it's very fulfilling. I would just say it's very fulfilling, and I feel very, very blessed to be used by God in that fashion.
If we could plug GriefShare for a second, how often are there groups? How does that work?
We do it twice a year.
Okay.
It's a 13-week session each time, so in the fall and in the spring.
Okay.
And people are allowed to come in. In fact, we invite them at any point during the semester. It's an open group.
Okay.
People can join us. We often have people from outside the church who'll see that online.
Mm-hmm.
We had a gentleman that joined us for the first time for our second session last week. He lives very close, and he was saying, he doesn't have a community. He doesn't have people to talk to. Well, here's your community, and, we're here to help you.
Yeah.
So it just serves so many different purposes.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So what do you do with the TLC team?
Well, this is I feel a very natural fit. I am, I would say, by nature a helper.
Okay.
I don't think I could spend 27 years in law enforcement and beyond not having that helper mentality, because you pretty much have to. But that's just how God wired me, and I love it. I love stepping into gaps. Within my family, and if there's a gap that and I have a capacity and time and resources to fill it, then I will.
What do some of those TLC team gaps look like? If you could just rattle
meals, rides to places, helping
memorial services, helping in. If somebody needs to move something, if there's a need that somebody has, and it's more frequently than not, it's, a meal type of a situation.
Okay.
I love doing that. I love, providing meals when people don't have time to cook because their energy and time needs to be spent elsewhere.
Yeah.
They're healing from a surgery, or, they're caring for, a sick family member, I have received that, in my own grieving time, in my own healing time. Even recently I had a knee surgery, and, the TLC team here, stepped up and helped me, and I was very thankful for that. So it's a beautiful ministry that we have here, and I love being a part of that.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And Doreena almost always signs up whenever she's able to.
Yeah.
It's very frequent.
So tell me about the safety and security team, and like what that's about, and what you're doing with that.
So this is interesting. So at the beginning of the summer, Kyle and Missy approached Jerry and I, knowing they must have found out through the grapevine that we were retired law enforcement, and
Jerry also. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
He retired a sergeant. He worked for 30 years. Myself 27, as I said. But knowing that we have law enforcement background, they wanted to run some things by us and ask us if we could possibly help get this team off the ground.
Okay.
And help them with structure, and what is it going to look like? What are the team's needs? What skill set are we looking for in people to be part of the team? And so it was very very educational, to be on the ground floor of a new ministry. So that's that. Very exciting.
Yeah,
it is. It's very exciting and fluid. It will be a growing ministry as our church is growing. With the new children's ministry building. We'll soon need more eyes and ears around the church.
Yeah,
but in today's in our age today, I should say. We definitely should expect the evil one to be on high alert to attack churches, however they can. And it's not necessarily that we would have an attack. You just we needed a team in place to be the first responders here to some crisis, whether it be a medical need, whether it be, is more likely than not to happen in a church our size than anything else. But, there's all kinds of hardships that go on even within a church body that could, bring on crisis at church.
Yeah.
So, to be extra eyes to look out for, different behaviors and try to step in and minister or redirect or call other resources to a situation. We have one police officer who is sworn here, and our team is an unarmed team. We, are, just a eyes on a situation, act as you can within your capabilities. If it's not within your capabilities, we call additional resources. So that's what our team is. And our team it's made it. We should all feel very safe at our church because I didn't know how many retired or current law enforcement personnel we have here, current or retired military or firefighters or medical doctors and nurses. It's just incredible, the makeup of our congregation. So yeah, we're wonderful. We're pretty safe.
Oh. Well, I have to tell you, just like knowing that you were part of the initial formation of this team is really cool to me from my perspective, and it seems like an answer to prayer, because when we were talking about this months ago on the elder board, one of my concerns was that as we are developing a team that's going to be about security and safety, that in the execution of that role, there not be any lessening of the sense of warmth and welcome here at the church, And I was just like, I don't know what kind of folks, what kind of backgrounds and temperaments that kind of ministry would attract and stuff. And so I was just like, oh, let's keep an eye on this as well. And so, like I said at the top, I was like, yeah, I would not have guessed that you were in law enforcement. So it's a
very natural thing, and they're smiling and engaging with people, and it's just a safety thing because they are also being very observant about things, and I love that.
Striking a balance is important.
Yeah, sure.
Just having that watchful eye, but yet welcoming and warm, and the ministry mindset, maintaining the ministry mindset is very important.
Yeah. Well, I just so appreciate just you talking earlier also about like the different hats you'd wear, and there's a time for firmness, there's a time for warmth, and it's exciting to me to learn that that you're a significant part of that team. So thank you very much for responding to that.
Sure.
So
it's an honor.
What is just kind of coming back to the earlier part of your story a bit, reflecting on that, what is a common point of encouragement or advice that you maybe have found yourself giving to other widows over the years as we just kind of wrap up here?
Well, the advice that ultimately was the most important advice to give was, you've got choices to make. God gave us a brain, and we have choices to make. We can either do this life without him, or we could, have that be a difficult, path, or we can travel this journey with him and in lockstep, just rely on his goodness, his sustainment, his faithfulness in all of his character, to just to just be what leads us, down that path. And that will be the message that I will tout from here to eternity, because it's just so important. And I know, I've had many opportunities to speak, with widows and not even people that have lost people very close to them and are hurting. And it's important to hear where people are hurting and allow them to share where they're at.
Yeah.
That helps me to know where I can say, okay, this is where God can meet you right here, right now, and you can give it to Him, and it will just make this load so much lighter for you. So I guess that's the. Did I answer that?
Yes, you did. Okay. Beautifully. Thank you so much. Right. Yeah, this has been even better than I thought. This was going to be a great conversation, and it was just so much more rich and wonderful than even I expected. So, Doreena, thank you so much for being willing. Is there anything, Della, that you wanted to touch on or cover before we wrap up?
No, I just think that Doreena does a really good job just listening to her of pacing with people and just knowing like what hat she needs to wear at each time and how important that is, and listening to them. And we're just so blessed to have you at our church because you just have this attitude of, okay, I'll do that. And
it's very humbling to hear.
We need people in our church to do that. And you do that so beautifully. And it's just such a blessing to work with you. And
likewise,
I would say too, that every time I talk to you, and I keep saying this, but it's so true, you can see Jesus so beautifully through you. Because you really love your Savior. You know what He saved you from. And so like when she's reading a verse like in GriefShare, or I see her in other contexts, or even just talking to people in the lobby, you can just see her love for the Lord. And it just like, you'll even just have like emotion with that too, because it just means something, just cuts to your heart. That's so special.
That's all God. And I think we all know that. God works through us, and I'm just, all glory to Him. All glory to Him.
Well, Doreena, thank you again so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Yes,
you're welcome. Thank you for asking me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, that is definitely going to be one of the more memorable episodes, I think, just for me personally.
I agree.
It's probably one that I will go back and listen to maybe more than once in the coming years. Just a wonderful, wonderful conversation. So there's so much there that we could reflect on, but maybe just pick one thing. What would be one thing that kind of stands out from our time talking to Doreena?
How God intervened in Doreena's life, that she had given her life to Christ. She faced suffering, as we all do. It was pretty profound suffering. And how God met her in that. And the whole piece about forgiveness too, because we all struggle with that. There's some things that are okay to forgive, but when you get to something that's profound, such as she went through, you can imagine you would really struggle with that. And the steps that she took and how she reached out to God, and she knew He was asking, you must forgive. And that she had to rely on Him for that, and how He helped her through that whole process. I just think that is something that we all need to, in our own lives, take to heart and think about and apply.
Yeah, I think for me, very similarly, it was centered on the idea of forgiveness that stood out to me, and how she talked about it in terms of the freedom that she felt, where I think that our anger that we hold on to, we don't realize is just further damaging us in addition to whatever has been done to us or whatever we're feeling on behalf of someone else. There's just more anger, and there's just more weight that we are dealing with that is unnecessary. And that idea of like I think it was you that said that forgiveness, part of it is just realizing this is too big for me to judge. It's too big for me. And so it's not saying I'm going to decide that it's okay. It's deciding that I am going to leave the judgment, the consequences, the ramifications, the discipline. I'm going to leave all of that in God's hands. I'm not going to take it upon myself to bring about vigilante justice or, whatever, or to be constantly wishing for more and more and more on them, but recognizing, ultimately God is going to have to carry this out now or in eternity. He's going to have to bring out perfect justice, because apart from that, even our systems of justice are, they fall so short, and we can just see people getting what is under the law a just, quote unquote, punishment, but we can still be left feeling like, but that still wasn't enough. And so there is something about some evils that they're just too big for us to really properly execute justice on. And the freedom is in giving it over.
I completely agree. And truly, for the big things, is there anything that would actually make us feel like things are okay? Because we could say, if I could just exact justice in this way or that way. Yeah. But then you still would be left like it's still not okay.
Yeah.
So God's the only one who can handle it. And I do like, too, as you said, that she brought up that, it is God that intervenes, and takes that. We have to admit that this thing that happened is wrong. We don't just say, well, I'm just giving it to God. We also have to acknowledge this thing was wrong. It is wrong.
Yeah.
That is a super important step. Yeah. And Doreena also brought that out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Really good one. But that is it for this episode of the Red Mountain Community Church podcast. A big thank you to Arian Rossi for organizing and editing the show, to Jessica Garcia for her oversight, and to the pastors and church leaders who help recommend our guests. You can follow Red Mountain Community Church on Instagram and Facebook, where you can also leave us comments and suggestions to help make the show better. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you don't miss out on the next episode. And if by chance you want more of me blabbing on topics relevant to Christian geeks, you can check out my personal weekly show, the Christian Geek Central podcast. In the meantime, I'm Peter Franson. Oh, I forgot to remind you, and now you say, and I'm
Della Zwick.
Dang it, Peter.
Did we go back on that?
No. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you on Sunday.